There are moments in history when ordinary lives collide with extraordinary ideas, when a quiet nudge inside the human mind echoes patterns written into the fabric of the universe itself. Across centuries, people have described this moment with different language. Some call it revelation. Others call it vocation. Scientists describe it as a shift in attention, a reorientation of priorities driven by information, energy, and probability. But the experience is remarkably consistent. A sudden sense that the path you are walking no longer fits the person you are becoming. A feeling that the work filling your hours is misaligned with a deeper assignment unfolding beneath conscious awareness. This is not mysticism in the shallow sense. It is not fantasy. It is a phenomenon that appears wherever human cognition meets complex systems, from the laboratories of modern physics to the journals of ancient philosophers. Something changes when attention locks onto meaning. Something measurable happens when intention reshapes behavior. And sometimes the most disruptive instruction is not to do more, but to stop, to step away, to quit what once made sense so that something else can emerge. This story is not about abandoning reason. It is about understanding why moments of radical change appear again and again in science and history, and in the structure of the universe itself. If you value long-form, thoughtful science documentaries like this one, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. Share which part of the country you are watching from in response to this question. Which part of the country are you watching from? To understand why the idea of a single defining assignment resonates so deeply. It helps to begin far from modern life. Long before jobs existed in their current form, human beings evolved not as specialists in narrow tasks, but as adaptive systems responding to changing environments. Early survival required constant recalibration of effort. Attention shifted toward food when scarcity appeared, toward shelter when climate changed, toward cooperation when threats increased. In these contexts, stopping one activity to begin another was not failure, it was intelligence. The brain evolved to recognize inflection points, moments when persistence became maladaptive and redirection became essential. What we now interpret as an inner voice or a calling can often be traced to this ancient cognitive function. The detection of diminishing returns. Modern work culture, particularly in industrialized societies, has disrupted this adaptive rhythm. Jobs became stable, repetitive, and externally structured. Success became defined by endurance rather than alignment. Yet the brain did not evolve for indefinite repetition disconnected from meaning. Neuroscience shows that motivation declines sharply when effort is decoupled from perceived purpose. Dopamine signaling, often misunderstood as a simple reward chemical, is actually more sensitive to expectation and progress than to comfort or security. When a task no longer signals forward movement toward a valued outcome, neural systems begin to resist. Fatigue increases, attention wanders, stress hormones rise, the body in its own language begins to say stop. This biological signal has been interpreted through spiritual language for thousands of years. Ancient texts often describe a divine instruction to leave one occupation and take up another. Historically, these stories were not meant to encourage recklessness. They reflected an understanding that certain roles exhaust their usefulness when conditions change. In agricultural societies, a failed harvest demanded immediate reorientation. In mercantile cultures, a closed trade route forced reinvention. The language of command, of being told to quit and begin anew, encoded a practical truth about survival in uncertain systems. Modern science describes similar transitions using different terms. In complex systems theory, a phase transition occurs when incremental change suddenly produces a qualitative shift. Water becomes ice. Markets collapse. Ecosystems reorganize. Human lives are also complex systems. Careers, habits, and identities remain stable until stress accumulates beyond a threshold. At that point, the system reorganizes. What feels like a sudden instruction is often the conscious awareness of a process that has been building quietly for years. Physics offers an unexpected parallel. In quantum mechanics, systems do not always change smoothly. They exist in stable states until a transition occurs, releasing or absorbing energy. An electron does not slide gradually between energy levels. It jumps. The mathematics describe probabilities, not narratives, but the pattern is striking. Stability followed by abrupt change is not an exception in nature. It is a rule. When people describe a moment of clarity that compels them to abandon a previous role, they are often describing a psychological phase, transition driven by accumulated information and internal pressure. This does not mean that every impulse to quit is meaningful or wise. Distinguishing signal from noise is essential. Science demands careful framing. Not every dissatisfaction is destiny. Not every desire is instruction. But research in decision science shows that prolonged misalignment between values and daily behavior produces measurable cognitive strain. Over time, the mind searches for coherence. It begins to reorganize priorities. When clarity finally arrives, it often feels external because the conscious mind encounters a conclusion it did not deliberately calculate. The result feels like being told. The phrase "only assignment" carries particular weight because it speaks to focus. Human attention is finite. Cognitive psychology demonstrates that divided attention degrades performance and satisfaction. Multitasking reduces accuracy and increases fatigue. When individuals commit fully to a single meaningful pursuit, neurological efficiency improves. Networks associated with learning and creativity strengthen. The sense of purpose stabilizes emotional regulation. From this perspective, the idea of one assignment is not mystical exclusivity. It is an acknowledgement of how the brain functions best under conditions of deep engagement. History reinforces this pattern. Many of the figures who advanced science, art, and philosophy did not follow linear career paths. They abandoned secure positions to pursue uncertain work that aligned with their intellectual obsessions. These decisions are often romanticized in hindsight, stripped of risk and doubt. In reality, they were responses to internal pressure that made continuation impossible. The language of calling emerged later, applied retroactively to describe a reorganization that felt inevitable once it occurred. Even in astronomy, a field defined by vast scales and impersonal forces, the idea of alignment appears repeatedly. Planetary systems form from chaotic disks of gas and dust. Over time, material settles into stable orbits. Objects that cannot find equilibrium are ejected. Stability is not granted by persistence alone, but by resonance with the system structure. Human lives, embedded in social and economic systems, behave similarly. Roles that resonate with personal capacities and values persist. Those that do not eventually collapse. The tension between security and significance is particularly pronounced in contemporary society. Economic systems reward predictability. Education channels individuals toward predefined outcomes. Yet innovation arises from deviation. Scientific breakthroughs often come from researchers who step outside established frameworks. This does not require abandoning rigor. It requires redirecting attention toward questions that matter deeply enough to sustain long-term effort. When people describe being instructed to quit, they are often responding to this tension. The old role no longer supports the cognitive demands of the questions they cannot stop asking. Importantly, science also cautions against absolutism. The universe does not issue personalized commands. Meaning arises through interpretation. Humans impose narrative on experience to make sense of change. The language of divine instruction functions as a psychological shorthand, compressing complex motivations into a single, compelling story. This narrative power can be constructive or destructive depending on how it is used. When it encourages thoughtful realignment grounded in evidence and reflection, it can catalyze growth. When it bypasses responsibility or critical thinking, it can lead to harm. Understanding this distinction is part of the assignment itself. The responsibility to evaluate impulses, test assumptions, and ground decisions in reality does not disappear when meaning intensifies. If anything, it becomes more important. The history of science is filled with cautionary tales of conviction and tempered by evidence. Progress emerged not from certainty alone, but from disciplined curiosity. The title of this documentary uses dramatic language because humans respond to narrative. But beneath the drama lies a sober truth. Lives change when attention changes. Careers end when the conditions that sustain them no longer exist. New work begins when curiosity, capacity, and context align. The feeling of urgency reflects the costs of delay, not the presence of supernatural force. In dynamic systems, hesitation near a tipping point increases instability. Once misalignment becomes obvious, persistence extracts a higher psychological price. This is why the instruction feels absolute. Only assignment does not mean exclusivity in a cosmic sense. It means that at certain moments clarity demands simplification. Complexity must be reduced so that energy can be redirected. In neuroscience, this is described as pruning. Synaptic connections weaken and disappear when they are no longer useful. This process increases efficiency. The brain does not mourn every lost pathway. It adapts. Seen through this lens, quitting is not rejection, it is reallocation. The universe does not waste energy. Neither does a healthy mind. What feels like abandonment is often conservation. What feels like loss is often preparation. The challenge is not whether to listen, but how to interpret. Science does not tell anyone what to do. It offers frameworks for understanding why certain moments feel unavoidable and why ignoring them carries consequences. As this series unfolds, the focus will move from personal experience to broader patterns. The same principles governing individual change operate at cosmic scales. Systems reorganize when pressure accumulates. Stability emerges from alignment, not force, and meaning, while constructed, is constrained by reality. The assignment, whatever form it takes, exists at the intersection of capability, curiosity, and context. Recognizing it requires attention. Acting on it requires courage. Understanding it requires patience and evidence. When people speak about being chosen, the word itself invites misunderstanding. It sounds exclusive, personal, even flattering, as if the universe selects individuals the way a committee grants awards. Science offers no evidence for that kind of favoritism, but it does describe something far more subtle and far more demanding. In complex systems, certain elements become critical not because they are special, but because of where they sit in the structure. They occupy positions where small changes have disproportionate effects. In physics, these are called critical points. In networks, they are nodes with high connectivity. In biology, they are regulatory genes. In human systems, they are moments, roles, and individuals positioned at intersections where information converges. To be chosen in this sense is not to be elevated. It is to be placed under pressure. Modern neuroscience shows that the human brain is not a passive observer of reality. It is an active prediction machine, constantly generating models of the world and updating them based on feedback. This process is efficient, but it is also conservative. The brain prefers stability. It resists revising its models unless the error signals become too large to ignore. That resistance is why people stay in misaligned jobs long after dissatisfaction appears. As long as the predictive model still mostly works, the brain tolerates the mismatch. But when prediction errors accumulate, something shifts. Stress responses intensify. Attention narrows. Sleep patterns change. What feels like anxiety is often the nervous system flagging a growing discrepancy between expectation and reality. At a certain point, the model collapses. The brain no longer believes the story it has been telling itself about who you are and what you are doing. That collapse can feel like crisis, but it is also the prerequisite for reorganization. This is where the language of calling enters, not because an external voice suddenly speaks, but because the internal narrative resets. The new model feels imposed rather than chosen because it emerges from evidence the conscious mind did not assemble deliberately. From the inside, it feels as though something has been revealed, not decided. In cognitive science, this phenomenon is known as insight restructuring. It is the same mechanism that produces sudden solutions to difficult problems after long periods of frustration. The brain explores possibilities unconsciously, and when a coherent pattern finally forms, it breaks into awareness fully formed. The experience is abrupt. The certainty feels absolute. People describe it as knowing. History shows that such moments often precede significant contributions, but they also precede significant mistakes. Certainty alone is not proof of truth. The feeling of inevitability must be tested against reality. This is where the scientific lens becomes essential. The universe itself provides a powerful analogy. In cosmology, structure does not emerge evenly. Matter clumps, gravity amplifies small fluctuations. Regions with slightly higher density attract more matter, becoming galaxies, while emptier regions become vast voids. No galaxy is chosen in a moral sense. Its formation is the outcome of initial conditions and physical laws. Yet once formed, its influence extends far beyond its original scale. Human potential behaves similarly. Abilities, interests, and circumstances interact. Some combinations create regions of high cognitive density, places where ideas cluster and compound. When someone finds themselves repeatedly drawn toward the same questions, the same problems, the same unexplored territory, it is not random. It reflects an alignment between internal capacity and external demand. The sense of being chosen emerges when this alignment becomes undeniable. The danger lies in misinterpreting alignment as entitlement. Science does not support the idea that purpose exempts anyone from effort, doubt, or failure. In fact, alignment often increases difficulty. When work resonates deeply, the stakes feel higher. Errors feel personal. Progress becomes emotionally charged. Many abandon their assignment not because it is wrong, but because it is hard. This is why the instruction to quit feels paired with urgency. Continuing in a misaligned role drains the resources needed to pursue the aligned one. Time, attention, and energy are not infinite. Decision science shows that prolonged indecision carries hidden costs. Opportunity narrows, skills atrophy, motivation decays, the system degrades. Yet urgency must be distinguished from impulsivity. In physics, rapid transitions occur only after long periods of accumulation. A star does not explode without first exhausting its fuel. A tectonic shift does not occur without pressure building over decades. Similarly, meaningful life transitions are rarely sudden in origin, even if they feel sudden in execution. This raises an uncomfortable question. How does one tell the difference between a genuine phase transition and a temporary fluctuation? Science cannot answer this definitively for individual lives, but it offers criteria. Signals that persist across contexts are more reliable than those tied to momentary emotion. Patterns that intensify over time carry more weight than those that fade. Alignments that withstand scrutiny and contradiction are stronger than those that collapse under questioning. Another important factor is competence. In every domain studied, from mathematics to music to engineering, deep engagement produces skill. If an assignment is real, evidence of capacity usually exists, even if undeveloped. Curiosity that leads to learning, persistence in the face of difficulty, and gradual improvement are measurable signs. The universe does not assign tasks arbitrarily. Systems evolve toward efficiency. Roles emerge where they are most likely to be fulfilled. The idea of a single assignment also intersects with identity. Sociologists note that modern individuals derive identity primarily from occupation. This is historically unusual. For most of human existence, identity was tied to kinship, geography, and shared belief. The elevation of career to identity creates fragility. When the job fails, the self fractures. The call to quit, then, is not merely economic, it is existential. It demands reconstruction of identity on different foundations. Philosophy has long wrestled with this problem. Existential thinkers argued that meaning is not discovered but created through commitment. Science complicates this view by showing that not all commitments are equal. Some are sustained by feedback loops that reinforce growth. Others degrade over time. The challenge is not choosing meaning arbitrarily, but recognizing which commitments generate coherence rather than fragmentation. This is where the language of assignment regains its usefulness. An assignment implies responsibility rather than preference. It suggests obligation to reality rather than indulgence of desire. When framed this way, the idea becomes less self-centered and more demanding. The question shifts from what feels good to what needs to be done given one's capacities and circumstances. The universe, as far as science can tell, is indifferent to individual fulfillment. Yet it is not chaotic. Patterns repeat, structures emerge, constraints shape outcomes. Human meaning arises within these constraints. The sense of being called is the subjective experience of aligning with objective structure. It is neither proof of transcendence nor illusion. It is interpretation grounded in pattern recognition. Understanding this reframes the drama of quitting. It is not rebellion against society nor blind obedience to impulse. It is a strategic withdrawal from a role that no longer fits the system you inhabit. In biology, cells that fail to perform their function are either repurposed or eliminated. In organizations, roles evolve or disappear. In lives, careers end so others can begin. The moment of action, the point when hesitation finally gives way to movement, is where theory meets reality. All the reflection, all the discernment, all the accumulation of signals across time and experience converge into a single decision. Quitting a job, leaving a stable environment, redirecting energy toward one assignment. These are not merely economic choices. They are decisions that ripple across cognition, physiology, and social networks. Modern psychology calls this a commitment threshold. In physics, it resembles a tipping point in nonlinear systems, where a slight push transforms the state entirely. The personal and the universal operate on the same principles. Accumulated pressure, aligned capacity, and emergent opportunity produce sudden transformation. Biologically, the act of leaving behind what no longer serves begins a cascade of changes. Stress hormones recalibrate. Neural networks shift focus. Dopaminergic systems, which were previously muted by repetitive or misaligned tasks, suddenly respond to novelty and purpose. Motivation, once waning, surges because energy is now directed toward coherent goals. The brain is most plastic when survival, physical, cognitive, or existential, is engaged. In other words, leaving the old path is not just symbolic, it is a recalibration at the neurochemical level, a rewiring that facilitates growth and learning. History offers countless examples of these transitions. Consider figures in science, philosophy, and the arts who abandoned security in favor of alignment. Isaac Newton, initially a reluctant scholar of optics, shifted focus after crisis disrupted his prior path. Nikola Tesla left his employment in Europe to pursue independent experimentation that reshaped electricity. These moments were not random rebellions. They were responses to accumulated pressure, clarity of purpose, and recognition of opportunity. The sense of being chosen, of being assigned, is always accompanied by risk, uncertainty, and social tension. Yet these are the very conditions that allow latent potential to express itself fully. Complexity theory illuminates why only a single, coherent assignment often produces extraordinary results. In systems where resources are limited, time, attention, energy, divided focus generates diminishing returns. Effort spread across multiple tasks rarely achieves mastery. Single-minded engagement increases feedback loops, strengthens relevant networks, and amplifies learning. The assignment is not merely a task. It is a lens through which all other experience gains coherence. By committing fully, the individual aligns internal capacities with external opportunity, creating a structure in which sustained progress becomes possible. At a deeper level, this process touches on the intersection between consciousness and reality. Modern physics, particularly interpretations of quantum mechanics, reveals that observation is not passive. The observer plays an active role in collapsing possibilities into a single outcome. Some theorists speculate that human intention operates similarly on smaller scales in daily life. Focused, deliberate attention on a coherent goal may increase the probability of relevant outcomes aligning with that goal. While this is a speculative interpretation, it resonates with countless anecdotal experiences. When people commit fully to one path, synchronistic events often appear, opportunities emerge, and obstacles recede. Whether this is causation or pattern recognition is less important than the practical effect. Focused alignment changes probability distributions in meaningful ways. Social systems mirror this dynamic. One individual's clarity can create ripples that reorganize networks of influence. Colleagues, friends, and communities respond to consistent, coherent action. Projects that stagnated suddenly gain momentum. Ideas that were previously ignored are recognized. The assignment, once enacted, propagates outward, demonstrating that personal alignment is inseparable from context. The act of following one's assignment is simultaneously inward and outward, a recalibration of mind, body, and environment. Yet the path is not linear. Transitions often involve cycles of uncertainty, doubt, and even temporary failure. The brain resists sustained novelty, and social structures resist deviation. Energy must be continually directed and reinforced. This is why perseverance after the initial act of quitting is essential. The assignment is rarely a single step. It is a continuous process of adjustment, learning, and refinement. Mistakes are not indicators of misalignment, but feedback mechanisms that guide the system toward more stable, effective configurations. Philosophically, this reflects a tension between determinism and agency. External conditions, economics, biology, social networks, shape the options available. Yet within these constraints, the individual exercises choice. The assignment is not a guarantee, but it is a focus point, a locus of possibility around which agency can be exercised most effectively. Neuroscience supports this. Decision-making is optimized when cognitive load is reduced and attention is concentrated. The single assignment is not arbitrary. It is the system's way of guiding adaptive behavior toward maximal coherence and efficiency. Culture adds another layer of complexity. Societal narratives about success, stability, and responsibility often conflict with personal alignment. The instruction to quit can feel subversive, dangerous, or immoral. Yet across history, cultural transformation frequently emerges from individuals who risk stability for purpose. Scientific revolutions, artistic renaissances, and social reforms were rarely incremental. They were catalyzed by people willing to step fully into their assignment, disregarding convention in favor of alignment with deeper truths. The final principle underlying this chapter is integration. To fully embrace the assignment, internal, external, and systemic coherence must converge. Skills, values, opportunities, and relationships all play roles. The assignment is both internal compass and external experiment. It is navigated through observation, reflection, and action. In cognitive terms, it requires iterative feedback loops. In practical terms, it demands courage and discipline. In universal terms, it reflects the same principles that govern stars, galaxies, and ecosystems. Systems reach optimal expression when their components resonate in alignment. The implication for modern life is profound. Moments of clarity, urgency, and seeming revelation are not random anomalies. They are emergent signals from the interaction of personal capacity, environmental conditions, and temporal opportunity. Recognizing them requires attention, acting on them requires courage, understanding them requires reflection. To ignore these signals is to resist systemic alignment, resulting in wasted energy, diminished potential, and prolonged dissatisfaction. To follow them is to enter a process of transformation where risk is unavoidable but reward is maximized not merely in wealth or status, but in coherence, capability, and contribution. In closing, the narrative of being chosen, of receiving an assignment, is both metaphorical and literal. It is metaphorical in the sense that the universe does not issue personalized decrees. It is literal in the sense that human cognition, biology, and social systems generate pressures and opportunities that functionally operate as instructions. Understanding this duality allows one to navigate the path with both rigor and reverence. Quitting is not an end. It is the threshold of emergence. It is the moment when preparation, insight, and opportunity intersect. It is the initiation into a process that, if followed attentively, leads to fulfillment, impact, and alignment with the systems, both personal and universal, that shape reality itself. The journey does not end with departure. It begins there. Every subsequent choice, action, and reflection is part of the same assignment. The universe does not wait. Systems evolve. Opportunities fluctuate. Time, once misaligned, cannot be reclaimed. The decision to embrace the assignment fully, to act decisively and coherently, transforms not only individual life, but the networks of interaction that ripple outward, creating effects far beyond what the mind initially anticipates. In this way, the story of quitting your job is the story of stepping into alignment with reality itself, the narrative of participating consciously in the unfolding of a complex, ordered, and astonishingly dynamic universe.